What's my style? In a word, Edward.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather beneath the golden glow of Hollywood's ever-shifting spotlight to unravel a confession so unexpected it threatens to rewrite the story of one of America's most beloved sweethearts. Julia Roberts, the dazzling smile that graced blockbusters and charmed millions, has always stood apart from the endless feuds and backstage betrayals that poisoned Tinseltown's brightest names. She has been the warm embrace of rom-com dreams, the fearless Erin Brockovich who took on giants, and the mother who guards her private life like a treasure chest. Yet at 57, behind the sanctuary of her guarded gates and the calm veneer she presents to the world, Julia Roberts has whispered a truth that chills the hearts of those who thought they knew her best. She named them. 5 souls she could never forgive. 5 names she carries like thorns under silk. Was it betrayal? Envy? Secret heartbreak? Or a hidden wound we never saw behind that iconic grin? Tonight, we step beyond the red carpets and magazine covers to glimpse the shadows she so carefully hid. So, stay with me, dear viewers, as we uncover what lies beneath Hollywood's brightest smile, and what happens when the America's sweetheart lifts the mask of kindness to reveal the anger she kept buried for decades. Before we dare to unearth the 5 names Julia Roberts holds in the darkest corners of her heart, we must first remind ourselves why such a revelation feels like a thunderclap over Hollywood's sunniest poster girl. Born Julia Fiona Roberts in 1967 in the sleepy warmth of Georgia, she was destined to carry the performing spirit that ran through her family's veins. Her mother, Betty Lou, taught her the craft of telling stories that could make an audience laugh, weep, and dream, all in the same breath. From the moment she stepped into the spotlight with Mystic Pizza in 1988, the world saw in her a natural magnetism, a blend of beauty and an easy charm that was impossible to resist. But it was Vivian in Pretty Woman that catapulted her into the stratosphere. Who could forget that unforgettable laugh, the defiant sparkle in her eyes, the way she transformed a simple fairy tale into a billion-dollar daydream for audiences everywhere? In those years, Julia Roberts was more than an actress. She was a symbol of hope, of second chances, of a woman whose smile alone could heal a broken heart. At the height of her fame, she held the industry in the palm of her hand. Notting Hill, Runaway Bride, Ocean's 11, each film a testament to her box office reign. In 2000, she stood before the world, clutching her Oscar for Erin Brockovich, her voice trembling yet strong, thanking those who believed in her when Hollywood wanted nothing more than to put her on a pedestal, or tear her down if she slipped. And yet, for all the millions she earned and the magazine covers she adorned, Julia Roberts was different. She seemed untouched by the venom that courses through Hollywood's veins. While other stars waged wars in gossip columns and destroyed each other's reputations, Julia walked away. She built a quiet life with cinematographer Daniel Moder, whom she married in 2002, and together they raised 3 children far from the constant glare of paparazzi lenses. She preferred the sanctuary of her family, the simple joy of motherhood, and gave her heart to causes like UNICEF, proving that even at the summit of stardom, a soul could remain gentle. To the world, Julia Roberts was the girl next door who made it big and never forgot her roots. Her friendships were legendary. Her camaraderie with George Clooney and Brad Pitt on the Ocean's sets. Her playful rapport with Hugh Grant, the co-star who once said her laughter could light up an entire set. Rumors of rifts or rivalries barely stuck to her name, melting away like gossip that dared not stain her pristine reputation. And yet, dear viewers, here we stand, on the threshold of a revelation that seems almost impossible. Because behind that beaming smile and those twinkling eyes, Julia Roberts harbored resentment so deep it survived decades, marriages, heartbreaks, and the relentless passing of time. 5 names. People who once shared her laughter, her trust, perhaps even her love, now forever etched in the shadows of her mind as the ones she hates most. Tonight, as we journey deeper, we will see how the cracks formed behind the glamour, how the betrayals she suffered festered in silence, and how, at 57, she chose to name them aloud. Stay with me, For the truth behind Hollywood's sweetheart is far more human and far more heartbreaking than we ever dared imagine. It is now that we slip behind the velvet curtain of Julia Roberts' golden life to glimpse the tangled knots of bitterness and heartbreak that began to gather when the camera stopped rolling. For decades, her life seemed like an enviable fairy tale. Yet every fairy tale hides a villain or two, and sometimes the wounds they inflict refuse to heal. Whispers of betrayal first brushed against Julia's pristine image in the early 90s, when love and ambition collided in ways she never anticipated. Her whirlwind marriage to country singer Lyle Lovett in 1993 stunned the public, a sudden union that had all the makings of a Hollywood fable, yet soon revealed cracks too deep to patch. Rumors swirled that friends close to her inner circle betrayed her confidence, leaking private tensions to tabloids hungry for a scandal. It was said that Julia felt abandoned by those she trusted most, those who should have shielded her from the vultures, but instead fed them scraps of her private heartache. And then came the thorn of envy, that silent intruder on every Hollywood set. Even as she found lifelong friendships with the likes of George Clooney, she could not escape the sting of cold shoulders and backhanded compliments from those who saw her as a threat. One actress, whose name will echo in that list of 5, is rumored to have undermined Julia behind the scenes, spreading whispers that her signature grin masked ruthless ambition. These rumors found Julia at her most vulnerable, just as she was fighting to break free from the suffocating image of America's eternal sweetheart. Behind closed doors, there were friends who took advantage of her generosity, colleagues who smiled for the cameras but privately seethed at her success. Some say she discovered shocking truths about collaborators who siphoned money from her projects, small betrayals that cut deep because they came from those she had invited into her confidence. And yet, dear viewers, perhaps the deepest wound lay not with distant co-stars or business acquaintances, but with family itself. Julia's life was not untouched by the bitterness that fame so often injects into bloodlines. She has spoken only in careful, guarded words about family tensions, rifts with siblings, old resentments that festered when fame and money entered the picture. It is whispered that among the 5 names she finally spoke, one belonged to someone who shared her blood but not her loyalty. Imagine, dear viewers, the weight of that. To succeed beyond her wildest childhood dreams, only to discover that envy could live even within her own kin. The woman who inspired so many to believe in happy endings was forced to watch as those closest to her twisted her triumphs into knives turned back on her. So the list grew, quiet and secret, as Julia smiled for the cameras and thanked her fans. An old friend who betrayed a trust, a family member whose jealousy poisoned years that should have been filled with unconditional love, a co-star whose gossip cut her reputation, a confidant who stole more than money. They each earned a place on that invisible roll call of resentment. And all the while, Julia held her head high, choosing silence over scandal, grace over a public fight. But, as we shall see, dear viewers, even the kindest hearts can only bear so much before they admit that some people do not deserve forgiveness. Stay with me, for the heart of this confession beats louder as we approach the storm that forced Julia Roberts to break her silence and name those she would never embrace again. If the early murmurs of betrayal bruised Julia Roberts' heart, it was the relentless swirl of rumor, resentment, and open wounds that carried her private agony into the glaring spotlight. A spotlight she had spent her career trying to control. As her fame soared, so too did the insidious voices determined to chip away at her image. What began as subtle gossip behind closed doors soon erupted into open attacks that Julia could no longer ignore. One name on that fateful list belonged to a trusted confidant turned cunning opportunist, a friend from her earliest days in Hollywood who Julia once described as her chosen family. But behind that friendship lay a hidden ledger of envy and exploitation. Julia discovered that private conversations meant to be kept sacred had been traded like currency to gossip columnists, each secret spun into lurid headlines that threatened her peace and mocked her trust. And yet, Julia remained the epitome of grace, appearing on red carpets with that same radiant smile while her inner circle crumbled. But the cracks could not remain hidden forever. During the height of her Ocean's 11 renaissance, Julia's professional triumph was shadowed by personal heartbreak. A longtime collaborator, a name respected in industry circles, quietly siphoned off earnings from joint projects. A betrayal that wounded her more deeply than any rival could have. Publicly, she could not expose them without dragging her own name through the mud. Privately, she seethed. The weight of loyalty can be a terrible thing when it becomes a leash. And family. Oh, dear viewers, family is the one wound that never truly closes. For years, Julia fought to maintain the facade of a close-knit clan, but insiders whisper that behind her serene holiday photos lay years of tension with certain relatives who clung to her fame like parasites. One family member's greed knew no bounds, demanding more of Julia's success than she could bear to give. Old slights became poison at the dinner table, and eventually, the divide became too wide to bridge. Even so, Julia chose silence, preferring the dignity of private distance over the spectacle of a public feud. Then came the media wars, the one time Julia's smile faltered under the weight of relentless intrusion. Paparazzi hounded her during the birth of her twins, snapping moments meant for family alone. Some of the most intrusive photos, dear viewers, are said to have been tipped off by someone within her trusted circle, a betrayal that left her feeling hunted, not just by strangers, but by someone who claimed to love her. It was the final blow. Years of held-in fury, the ache of being misunderstood, the despair of seeing her own life turned into tabloid fodder. All of it fed into the moment when Julia, now 57, decided the world needed to know. "I waited for an apology for so many years," she is rumored to have said to a close confidant, her voice low with the exhaustion of fighting battles no one could see. But some wounds aren't meant to be forgiven. The same America's sweetheart, who forgave the world for its endless hunger for her private moments, could not forgive these 5 people. These 5 traitors who carved scars into her soul. So she did what few expected. She named them, not for vengeance but for release. The climax of this revelation, dear viewers, is not a screaming match under the Hollywood sign, but a quiet, defiant declaration that her boundaries were no longer for sale. "My son grew up without a father by his side," she once said, alluding to the collapse of her first marriage and the shadows that lingered long after. Now, with her children grown, her career secure, and her peace hard-won, Julia Roberts has reclaimed her right to protect her heart by drawing a line no one will ever cross again. This is not the fury of a bitter woman, but the power of one who has carried the weight of grace for too long. And in the silence after the storm, she stands unburdened, her smile a little sadder perhaps, but real, at last. What does it take for a woman like Julia Roberts, whose very name once conjured visions of romance, laughter, and resilience, to stand before the world and whisper truths she had buried for decades? The answer, perhaps, lies in the quiet power of time and the unyielding pull of family, the same family that had once been her deepest wound. As the years rolled on, and the dazzling premieres gave way to simpler joys, Julia's perspective shifted. The woman who had once believed that silence was the greatest shield began to see that true peace sometimes demands speaking the unspeakable. It was not an easy road, for forgiveness had always been her default. She had forgiven the relentless press, forgiven the backhanded praise, forgiven the betrayals she saw but never named. Yet the day came when the weight of those 5 names grew too heavy to carry alone. They say the turning point arrived in a sun-drenched garden in Malibu, where Julia sat surrounded by the laughter of her 3 children, the very legacy she had fought so fiercely to protect. It was there, in that cocoon of warmth, that she realized holding on to old grudges was like handing her peace over to those who least deserved it. One by one, she spoke their names into the soft breeze, the syllables tasting bitter but freeing on her tongue. There was no grand press conference, no screaming headline. It was a confession shared with those she loved most, a chance to explain to her children that even the strongest, kindest hearts can bear scars. In that moment, tears fell not from regret, but from a release that had been denied her for far too long. And perhaps, dear viewers, that is where the true power of her story lies. For in speaking their names, Julia did not seek revenge. She sought to close a chapter that had shadowed her brightest days. She reclaimed her narrative from those who had profited from her pain, who had whispered her secrets to strangers, who had made her question the goodness she carried in her bones. Some of them, it is said, have reached out, offering apologies woven in too many years of silence. One former friend arrived at her doorstep, flowers in hand, ready to rewrite the ending they had shattered. But Julia, with a quiet smile, turned them away. After everything, only family remains, ladies and gentlemen. She is rumored to have told a confidant that same evening, her voice soft but resolute. And yet, family for Julia Roberts is no longer defined by blood alone, but by loyalty, trust, and a love that protects rather than poisons. So she sits now, 57 and freer than ever, her heart unburdened by secrets she once thought she must guard at all costs. The America's sweetheart, who once made us believe in fairy tales, has shown us that true strength sometimes means naming the villains of your own story, and then choosing to live on, lighter, wiser, and unafraid of the past. As we stand here at the quiet end of this tale, one that peeled back the velvet curtains behind Julia Roberts' radiant smile, we are left with questions that echo far beyond the gilded streets of Hollywood. How does a woman, loved by millions for her kindness and charm, carry the weight of betrayal for decades before daring to speak the names of those who wounded her most? Is forgiveness truly an act of virtue when it demands the sacrifice of our own peace? Tonight, you and I have walked together through the winding corridors of Julia Roberts' life, a life that shimmered with box office triumphs and fairy tale romances, yet hid heartbreaks she never wished the world to see. We have glimpsed how envy can bloom even in the warmth of family, how trusted friends can twist a gentle spirit into knots of doubt and resentment, and how silence, though graceful, can sometimes become its own prison. And now, dear viewers, I ask you, when the time comes to stand before the ghosts of our own betrayals, would you speak the names aloud, as Julia did? Would you dare to risk the judgment of the world to reclaim a sliver of your soul? For some, the answer will always be silence, a burden carried to the grave. But for others, like Julia, the courage to name what we hate most can be the final act of love for ourselves. In the end, perhaps the lesson she leaves us is not about hatred at all, but about the fragile hope that healing sometimes requires a wound to be exposed to the light. Fame, wealth, and admiration could not spare her from this simple truth. The real stage is the one we build in our own hearts, where the final act is not applause but acceptance. Dear esteemed viewers, as the credits of this story roll across your mind tonight, may you find your own way to forgive, or not forgive, the betrayals that hide behind your brightest smiles. After all, behind the glitz of stardom and the warmth of that unforgettable laugh, Julia Roberts is, at her core, a reminder that even the sweetest hearts can bleed, and that even the fiercest wounds deserve their day in the sun. Until we meet again, thank you for sharing this secret behind the spotlight, a truth that lingers, fragile and human, long after the cameras fade.